Welcome to the Grow Fast podcast, where we talk to leading sales, marketing, and biz dev professionals about how to accelerate sales, optimize marketing, and grow your business fast. Let's go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Grow Fast podcast. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of the Grow Fast podcast. The Grow Fast podcast is brought to you by MemoQ RFP, the easiest, fastest, and lowest cost way to process RFPs, RFIs, security questionnaires, and other important business documents. Today, we're going to be talking to Robin Ayoub, who is the VP and GM of Lionbridge, Canada. He's also the president of the Canadian Language Industry Association. Robin is not only a great salesperson, he's a great sales leader, and he's one of the few people that I know that thinks very deeply about all aspects of selling. Today, we're going to be talking to Robin about the importance of a sales process, what it is, how it applies, etc. But before we do that, let's say hi to Robin. Robin, how are you today?
Good. How are you, Mark? Good to see you again. Hopefully it's
Likewise.
Not too early for you where you are.
No, it's 8 a.m. and we're at a cabin Airbnb. It's about 100 years old up on Orcas Island in the San Juan Islands. My family's all asleep with, sugar plums dancing in their head, and I'm doing a podcast. What else?
Did you guys have a good Christmas?
Oh yeah. My kids are all grown right now. And so it's not necessarily about the presents and everything like that. Even though we do exchange a few small gifts, it's just really about being together. I mean, I'm sure the holidays are the same for you, just being together with your family and friends, right?
Absolutely. Well, good to see you again.
Likewise. Well, hey, thank you. We've been on each other's podcasts, different podcasts and so on. And it's funny because we haven't run out of topics to talk about.
That's something, Mark. That's something.
Yeah, no, it does. And as I said in the intro, I respect your sales leadership, your personal ability, but also the fact that you think about this, because a lot of people, they just think that salespeople just go out and grab business and bring it back. And we all know that it's not that simple, because you're dealing with people, and people are complex, organizations are complex. But we're going to talk about sales processes. And first off, let me ask you, what is a sales process versus not having a process? What's the difference in your mind?
So not having a process, that means to me shooting from the hip, throwing mud on the wall and hoping what sticks kind of thing. And having a sales process, at least some sort of a process in your mind before you approach your target audience, whoever they are, it makes the job a lot easier for a salesperson, and it allows you to move the sales process one step at a time forward, and in a way that it's methodical, and you can, because of the sales process that you are going to employ, you are going to have some predictable results. Of course, nothing is guaranteed, and you're selling, but at least you have some predictable results. You increase your chances of a positive outcome, in my opinion, if you have a sales process in place. Now, the sales process that you can employ, it will vary from what is the opportunity you're chasing, who are the audience you're going after. Is it a single-threaded opportunity, meaning a single decision maker, multiple decision makers, influencers? Who are these individuals that could impact your sales process on the journey of closing the sale, right? So the journey to close the sale, it is a journey. Of course, in our localization industry, in the day-to-day that we're living now, in the industry where we are, everybody wants to get to that, quick customer, quickly close it, move on to the next one. And this is, in my opinion, my humble opinion, and I don't know everything, obviously, and I would not pretend to know everything. It comes from, having been in the industry for 20 years, it comes from the misconception of the industry around what constitutes a sale. It is not build it and they come, not because you know how to do translation, customers going to flock to you. They won't, unless you tell them who you are and present to them a valid case of why they should choose to do business with you. And we'll go through the sales process of how you do that. They're not going to choose you. Of course, there's millions of translation companies, translation individuals out there that perform the job. There ought to be a way for you to come into your customers and present a business case why they should choose you.
So, I mean, you said several important things right there. And one of them is having a process kind of it alleviates some of the anxiety or the guesswork that comes with selling, because we know that sales can be a very difficult and very challenging, from both from actually achieving your results, but also the mental aspect of, oh God, what are they going to say? What's the next step? What should I do? And there's all this guesswork, right? And
Mhm.
and what if they say no? And it can be, if you allow it, it can be very demotivating, or kind of depressing, if you get uh, declined, or people turned down on several opportunities. But if you have a process, it helps you work through that. It takes
Mhm.
out the guesswork, as you said. The other thing you said is that depending on who you're selling to and what that organization looks like, you may use different processes. Okay. And I
True.
also like the fact that you don't just go in there and say, hey, sign right now. You've got to do your work first, right? You got to build that
True.
business case. I would say you also have to develop trust, because if you're selling translation or any other service, they're not going to buy from you unless they trust. But let me ask you then, and I want to drill down on all those areas. Um, there are so many different processes out there. There, the Sandler, Snap, Challenger Sales. I think that that you've said before that you tend to prefer Miller-Heinman.
Mhm.
Can you kind of describe what that is and how it
Mhm.
applies to those different things that you talked about in terms of taking the guesswork out, and then engaging with your customer in a meaningful way?
That's right. So I'm just going to, in order for me to apply the process for this particular discussion, I guess what I'm going to try to do here is I'm going to try to envision a complex opportunity that we're chasing.
Awesome.
And in a complex opportunity environment where you have multiple influencers, multiple decision makers. So let's go through some of those decision makers and who they are, who could possibly down the road could impact or derail or help you close the sale. So there's two things in an influence can do: can either derail your opportunity or can help you close it. So let's talk about the financial decision makers. So the financial
Hmm.
decision makers could be a CFO, could be a procurement manager, anybody who has a hold of a check that they're going to be paying at the end of the day. That's the final decision maker on the financial side. So once we've satisfied and identified who are the financial decision makers related to this particular opportunity or could impact this opportunity, I got to move on to the next decision maker. And the next decision maker could be a technical buying decision maker. And that technical buying decision maker could be the on the IT side, on the information technology side, or could be the technical aspect of delivering the service. And the
Hmm.
technical aspects of delivering the service could involve multiple facets. And this is where it gets really interesting, because again, this is not a quick journey to closing the sale. So as I go through these individuals and identify these individuals, each one of those individuals needs to be talked to, develop a trust with, bring them to your side, and it's going to take some networking to get there. So if I'm talking technical, that means I'm going to have to satisfy the person who's going to be using the service, directly using the service. That could be somebody who is translating on a day-to-day basis. The other technical buying decision could be the actual IT infrastructure. Does your software or does your tools, does your services fit within the technical environment of that particular customer that you're going to go after? And the third technical buying decision could be a security buying decision. Now, is
Yep.
everything aspect of it, like
Huge.
it's got to do with a lot of IT security discussion. Does that fit that environment that you're going to be selling to, and how do you prove that this is a fit for them? And once we've satisfied the technical buying decision, now we got to get into the legal buying decision. So the legal buying decision is also very important. Am I talking to does my when I'm talking about my contract, or I'm talking about the T's and C's that I want versus the T's and C's that the customer wants? Who do I talk to? Who do I satisfy? Who do I need to work with, either on my side as an organization who I'm selling their product, or on the customer side, who is the individual who is more likely to take a look at our T's and C's and say, okay, guys, you either come down to a little bit or we go up a little bit and we come to a compromise somewhere, but that needs to be absolutely satisfied. Now, this is the most important. The fourth one is the very most important, because we sell in a diversified way. There's not a single decision maker that can say I'm going to accept this particular translation vendor or not. This goes now, we call it the user buying decision. And that's where, and the user influence is it's like running a political campaign and you're trying to get the votes. So if you have 100 users in a company and 100 users, some of them are currently, let's say they're using some other vendor and you're trying to displace a vendor. So some of them are happy with the current vendor, some of them are not happy with the current vendor, and it becomes a vote of confidence, if you will. But you need to figure out who are these users, and not necessarily go after 100 users in this case, no, but you got to go after some of those, what we call the fox. And the fox meaning that individual that's going to guide you, maybe a user in this case, is going to say, well, I like you, I develop a trust with you, I like what you're offering, I like what you're saying. And now I'm going to walk you through the maze, the internal maze of how, who, and where you need to have a conversation to specifically go after some of those opportunities and close them. Now, when we go after all these four types of influencers, you cannot neglect any one of them. If you neglect one of them, and one of them is not satisfied, you cannot play the role of saying, oh, I offered a good price. That means, the technical buying decision has to be on board automatically. Why? Because I offered a good price. Well, that's not how it works. Good price is a good price. That's it. It stops right there.
So you got the buy-in possibly of the financial decision maker, but the technical guy goes, hey, you've got security issues with your platform, or you don't handle the right file types, or right?
Yeah. So all these influencers, and I call them at this point influencers, because they all collectively funnel together. Let's say, imagine them all in one boardroom at one point after you submitted your proposal, and they're negotiating or they're talking about your proposal. And they all have to give pros and cons about what you're offering. If you don't do the pre-work before, and they don't know you, they don't trust you, all they're going on is that RFP or proposal document that you submitted. They don't know you personally. And just imagine every one of those opportunity has like 10 proposals, maybe at least, arriving to the decision makers. If there is no pre-work for that, if they don't know you beforehand, all they're evaluating is a piece of work, a piece of paper, really. That they don't know you from Adam, and you're trying to just win based on either specific things, like either you lower your price or something else. I don't know. But building that human connection, people buy from people at the end of the day, right? With all these elements that I talked about, and if you do it beforehand, and it's not a quick win, this is where somebody hires translation sales or localization salesperson, expect them to do $2 million in a quarter. It's a complete impossibility, to be honest with you. I don't know what dreamland they're in. And the other thing too, and it's not saying it's an impossibility. It's sales. It's a time factor, as you and I talked one time, right? Before, if you give me time, everything is possible. If we're running up against the clock and you're saying every quarter you need to submit some sort of an unrealistic number without building any relationship, without knowing who these people are, it's completely impossible. Completely impossible. So what we're talking about here is focus on the Miller-Heinman opportunities where you need to follow or chase a complex sales where it's accounted in millions of dollars. I don't know, to some people maybe 100,000. I don't know, but high dollar value. And then you have to, as we were talking earlier, then you got to change your model a little bit, and you go after the transactional model. And the transactional model goes after like the smaller pieces of work that you probably can continuously feed the machine. And if every salesperson out there envision their sales process or their sales funnel as animals racing, and I'm using the word animals just to illustrate it, racing to the finish line, and you've got the big elephant, you've got the rabbits, you've got a bunch of other, and they're all traveling at various speeds to the finish line. And the finish line in this case is the close to win. And so the elephants normally, which are representing large opportunities, they travel slow, but they continuously progressing toward the finish line. That is something we need to manage. So you have to close a few small ones as you continuously feeding the machine, feeding the employer who hired you. their operational team with the smaller pieces of business as you keep an eye on the larger piece of business that you're chasing and using that complex methods.
So you're kind of getting into like the macro process of how you manage your book of business, your portfolio, or your career, right? But you can't just go after these big whales, and because it's going to take a year or two maybe to close those big whales. In the shorter term, you need some of the smaller opportunities. You need to work those. And I would argue there's a couple of reasons you need to work those. One is you need to plant as many seeds as possible because you never know which ones are going to grow. But also, the more seeds you're planting and the more interactions you're having, the better you get at understanding customer needs and also presenting your solutions. Because if you just deal with one or two big opportunities and you're waiting for a year, you're not going to get good, and you're going to have anxiety because you're working from a position of scarcity, and you're like, God, I only have one meeting this week. What am I going to do? And I'd be terrified.
That's right.
But when I'm doing 3 or 4 meetings a day, I'm just like, this is awesome. It's so fun. But I want to come back to that. Back to the Miller-Heinman, all the different specific buyer personas. I love that because I've seen it time and time again, where we get brought in by the user influencer who actually they're looking for a better solution. They'll reach out and they're super, super excited. And during that discovery call, if you don't find out who these other people are, you're like, yeah, we got this deal. And then all of a sudden you get the legal or the technical blocker, which I find to be the ones that they almost prefer to say no. They're not really interested in the platform. They're just interested in, is this going to somehow make my job difficult? Does it put us at risk at all? Right. And if you don't address that, they have veto power, right? And so you could just be going like, hey man, the users love us. And you get this technical blocker or, and so you've got to figure it out. Let me ask you, when you're doing, I guess you would call it a discovery call. You tell me what you call it, but how do you uncover who these people are? And then how do you reach out to them? Because talking to the user influencer, you're going to use one set of language or, and you're going to talk about the features and the benefits and things like that. But when you make that initial contact with the technical or the legal people or even the financial people, how do you frame the conversation?
So it's about discovery, right? So remember I mentioned somebody like how does one individual go to a company that never been in contact before, and how do they find their way around that company, right? So, and pick a company, any company, Fortune 500, etc., US or Canada, it doesn't matter. You have to find a window to get in, and that person or that individual that got you in, that could help you become that they can help you do a bit more discovery, but. And that individual I mentioned to earlier in my earlier response as the fox, that individual that's going to guide you through the maze, right? So, however, in a general discovery call, there's always room for questions and, getting to know one another. And as a salesperson and as a potential customer. And those questions can be asked. Like the typical question that nobody asks, I find, is, do you have budget for this? And it's as silly as this. You
need money.
At the end of the day, the transaction needs to close, and somebody needs to pay for it. Do you have the money to pay for it?
Right.
And so once you say, well, do you have budget for this? And if the answer is yes, we'd say, well, who holds the budget for this? Like, is it your budget or somebody else's budget that approves it, assigns it, etc.? And at the end of the day, like the more digging you do around that topic, and people are afraid of asking the question because they're afraid of the answer sometimes, and maybe the negative answer that turns people off.
That is so true. Please go ahead.
Maybe some people that get turned off by people saying, I asked the question. Maybe it's not my place to ask the question. No, it is your place. You're a salesperson. You have to get paid at the end.
Some people don't ask a girl or a guy out for a date because they're afraid they're going to get shut down. But go ahead.
That's right. So, and then, as you do these discoveries and you do what we call the account map. So you got to draw the map and you got to put names in boxes, and that name in boxes, that would be your cheat sheet, if you will, as a salesperson. I'm going after a Fortune 500 company. I know who I'm going to be talking to. Now I've got boxes, and these boxes on the diagram, it's literally a diagram. There's a form, you fill it out and you put these names in it. And then you just start to figure out, okay, so who am I missing now? What box is still empty that I need to fill out? And you start asking the questions. If you're not inquisitive, if you're not asking the right questions to the right people, and you're not finding the information, and a lot of these information today could be researched, etc. But it's part of the conversation that you would have with individual, and that demonstrates two things. It's not us being vulnerable as sales individual when we ask the question. It demonstrates to the audience that you're interested,
Absolutely.
in getting to know them.
You know, back to the point that you made about sometimes people are afraid to ask the questions, and I agree with you. Sometimes it's because they're afraid of getting the wrong answer, or they're afraid of getting shut down somehow.
Yeah.
I also feel that people sometimes they're not sure how to phrase the question. They feel it's awkward, and that's where I have something called a verbal toolbox, which is for every situation you should have a go-to phrase, one or two phrases that you can just throw out there. If somebody asks you a question and you don't know, you say, "That's a really good question. I haven't heard that before. Let me check with the team and get back to you." No big deal, right? You got to roll with it, right? But I was on a sales call with one gentleman who tended to be, he was a technical support person, and he had taken a sales training class. And during the call, and now, so I'm leading the call, but somehow, and he's talking about the technical solution, but at the end of the call, and he goes, "Oh yeah, I have one more question." He goes, what did he say? He said, are you the decision maker? And I was like, oh, you know, so I coached him after that. I said, I probably wouldn't say it that way, because if you think about how you just spend an hour talking to that person and then you ask them, are they decision maker? It probably doesn't leave such a good feeling. Maybe you could say something like, can you let us know like who else will be involved in this decision?
That's
Right.
right.
You know,
That's right.
but if you just kind of shoot from the hip and throw that out there, it can be awkward. So I'm a big proponent of figuring out those key phrases in advance, putting them in your toolbox and pulling them out when needed. So let's say you figured out who the technical and the legal people are. How do you approach them? And what do you say?
So this is where we need to figure out how much networking is being done and how important this account is to you. There's a lot of hard work needs to be done at this stage. So we need to identify these individuals and introduce ourselves to, right? So, and one of the things that could be done, and you know, I've done it before, is that I'm working with so and so. Like this is either via conversation or via an introduction, email or of any sort, or however you want to reach out to this individual. A conversation is much better. But why would they take a call from you, or why would they accept a meeting from you, not knowing who you are? That's the answer. And the answer for that is, look, I'm working with your colleague in department ABC. They're considering our solution, and I understand you are part of the decision-making process when it comes to specific area, be it legal, finance, etc., or technical. And I want to introduce myself, and I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing, and hopefully that helps in the decision making. And I want to go back a little bit to what you were saying earlier. Internal people from the customer side, generally, on the technical side of things, generally they don't want to do anything because they don't want to change it.
It's easier to say no than yes, right?
Change is bad.
Right. Change is bad. Yeah, it's risk. It's
That's
risk.
Right. So the idea is to gain, again, we always talk about in this industry about trust, and a trust on a variety of, it's like a prism almost, right? So it comes from a variety of individuals who are going to be coming in touch with the customer. And as you imagine yourself, like you're not one individual working with the customer, but you are part of a team working with a customer. There's many other people behind you or beside you are going to be the touch points working with this particular customer. Everybody needs to be on board with that strategy to be able to continuously build a relationship with this customer to close it. Because if I come in as a salesperson and my tech person or my engineer or whoever else are going to be in touch with these customers, and we're not on the same board, you have to be unified as to the goal as a customer, we approach these customers. Even the lawyer who are on our side, who's going to be working with their lawyer on their side, there's got to be some sort of an understanding that we're trying to win this customer. We're not trying to upset them, and we got to come to a compromise somewhere. So, because one of the items, non-related, but I'll throw it in there, is people ask me, like, what is the, how do you grow a company? I said, well, that's the owner or the entrepreneur asking the question. The answer to that is, before you answer the question, you may want to make sure, go talk to your operation team. Do they want to grow the company? Are they excited about growing the company? If they're not, two things: either you excite them somehow or you change them. If your objective is to grow a company, because if we're not all on board, the customer consents, the trust issue that you talked about, it's very fundamental. You cannot walk to somebody off the street and say, "Hey, trust me." I mean, we've seen bad movies about this one, but you got to develop it over time.
Yeah. So what you're saying is you could have internal blockers. You can go win business or you can attempt to win business, and you need their support, and they'd be like, I don't know, so do we have the capacity? Does this violate some of our standard T&C? How are we going to deal with this? And you need to get them on board as well. And so let's put that over into the parking lot. I'll come back to that in a second. I also want to come back to the whole thing about, growing a book of business with planting a lot of seeds, small and large opportunities. Come back to the Miller-Heinman kind of conversation. And trust, is that part of the Miller-Heinman process in terms of, is there an established way to build trust? And how do what methods do you find that are effective to accelerate the trust building process? Because trust takes time. Building trust takes time.
Of course. So one of the key standard practices when using the approach of Miller-Heinman, which I don't know if people remember this, or whoever took Miller-Heinman can attest to that. There's a blue and pink sheets. And those forms you have to fill out. And today people are like so busy and they're running 1,000 meetings per week. I don't know. They probably skip that part, but at least you do it mentally, or you do it via email, or you scribble it somewhere. And the objective of that is to document, where are we now, and where are we going to be going after, or what are we going to try to achieve after that call? So every call from the introduction forward, it is moving the yardstick 1 yard at a time forward. So meaning that as I'm going to talk to Mark today, what do I like to achieve from, what do I hope to achieve from this call today? So I'm trying to hope, for instance, I'm working with you today, and I'm hoping to achieve maybe a follow-up call, maybe a call with one of your colleagues of interest. That would be the goal. Like, of course, the ultimate goal is to close the $2 million account, but Rome was not built in one day. You have to lay the foundation. You have to build it a brick at a time.
Absolutely. And so, and again, we come back to the trust thing. It takes time. I found that, for example, with the different personas, there's similar, but sometimes different ways to accelerate trust. So, for example, with the technical and legal, maybe they're looking at things like, do you have ISO certifications? Are you SOC 2 compliant? Or things like that. Something kind of where they can, or you could say, we're working with these other customers. With the Fox, for example, maybe it's just about that user experience and your responsiveness to, or anticipating what they need. With financial, again, they might have their own different kind of perspective in terms of, hey, can I trust you or not? Like, how long have you been in business? How large is your business, et cetera?
That's right. So every individual has got their own way. And today, I've done a podcast a few weeks ago on the topic of using AI in sales tools to help you with that. So one of them is discovering which persona are you dealing with. And so one of the things we demoed on the last podcast with Bethany is the application called Humantic. Before you get into the call with anybody, it gives you a bit of an analysis on the individual and tells you, are they going to be hard to convince? It gives you a little bit of a persona description. Are they detail oriented? Are they going to be requiring a lot of proof when you talk to them about something? Show me the evidence. So once you've mapped out who you're walking into, you're not going to be walking into a conversation anymore and be shocked or be surprised to the reaction you're going to get, because you're going to be prepared. If I'm going to be talking to an individual who is an introvert, I know they are going to be conversationalists like you and I were having right now, and life is going to be great. If I'm going to be talking to an extrovert versus an introvert, if I'm going to be talking to an extrovert, it's okay. But if I'm talking to an introvert, I have to figure out a way to pull the data out of them. I have to figure out a way to pull them into the conversation. If somebody who's hard to convince, like somebody in legal, they're going to be more of a documented individual. So show me your T's and C's. Show me where the latest. Show me your SLA. What do what's your guarantees? All that stuff needs to be documented. It cannot be just verbal, and you better walk in with that kind of an information to a meeting. A lot of times, people go to a meeting nowadays and they're not prepared. And they're not prepared for the conversation. Even if you go not necessarily on a complex meeting, if you go into a small meeting, somebody requiring something transactional or something small, but still you need to put your paperwork together. If you're not walking in with some paperwork and the customer says, "Yeah, I like what I'm hearing," then you take 2 weeks to send the paperwork.
No, just put it out there.
It's not going to work.
This is our simple agreement. You can just initial here, and we'll send you everything else later. Exactly.
Make it easy.
Hey, so just before that, you were talking about. By the way, I mean, I'm agreeing with everything you have said so far. And so if I don't state that, please don't take it that I don't, because it's just like I think we're totally on the same page here. But you were talking about that you want to keep the momentum going forward, and every single activity should get you closer to that sales, and that's something that I treat as gospel. When I'm going out with a sales colleague and I say, "What's the purpose of this meeting?" and they say, "Oh, well, we're just going to meet with them and get to know them." I'm like, no. I want to know what we're going to get out of this meeting, because if you go into a meeting and not knowing what you want, you're probably not going to get it, right?
That's right.
So I want us to progress to that next step, and then you can start to map out how we can do that. But let's say when you go into a meeting, you got a face-to-face meeting, which I always say, get the meeting. Because you're not, you got to get the meeting. You get the meeting, and what do you do to set up the meeting? Because I'm just going to leave it there, because some people, they go in and they just kind of have a conversation. I'm sure that you have a plan, but walk me through that.
So when I set up a meeting, generally, depends on the individual. If it's a brand new individual that I'm dealing with and I haven't dealt with before, you got to use a professional way of setting up those meetings. Structure them, lay out what's the agenda for the meeting, for instance, share it ahead of time. The talking point, if it's no agenda, like you don't have anything, too detailed, maybe high level, whatever the agenda items are, make sure you share them ahead of time. So they can be prepared and you be prepared, and you be used. Those agenda items would be used as a guideline for the conversation, because when you're in the middle of a conversation, sometimes things tend to slip because you get into deep into one topic, but you haven't covered all the other topic and the clock is running. And so you got to keep an eye on the clock, because that individual's time is precious. It's valuable. They allocated 45 minutes or 30 minutes for you. You're trying to address as many points as you can within the 30 minutes. And I want to get by the end of that conversation to some action items. I want to get what are the next items that I need to put in place here to follow up, whatever the follow-ups are, sending a contract, scheduling a meeting, having another conversation with another person from the same account. But whatever it is, the action item, I want to develop some action items that we both agree on. Customer and vendor needs to agree on what the next action items are. And then people, not a lot of people do it. And I think it's a common practice. It was common practice. I don't know if people still do that. I still do it, is sending a summary of the meeting after you're done with the meeting.
Absolutely.
And whatever you've done, whatever you've agreed to do, like specifically on scheduling a meeting, don't wait a week to schedule a meeting. If you agree to schedule a meeting within the next, on your way out. Like I used to send follow-up meetings, and I still do, from my phone. After I captured everything, as soon as I hit the parking lot, you already have your follow-up meeting email.
I love that. And so there's a couple things there. If you make a commitment and you say, so what I'll do is I'll summarize this meeting. One, you've taken some pressure off of them, but you've made a commitment to them. And if you say, I'll send you a summary by the end of business tomorrow, but you send it to them early. So I always like to make a commitment. I'll get you that information by so-and-so, or I will check this for you. And I make the commitment and I make it time bound. And then I always get the commitment back early with more than they expected. because that's accelerating trust.
That's
Because
right.
one of the trust building techniques is make a commitment and keep it. So I make the commitment. I try to leave um, every meeting with some commitment made so
That's
that I
right.
can demonstrate the trust.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing I think that what's important is when you go into a meeting, I love the fact that you said, send an agenda, because if you don't send an agenda or an outline, or at least at the beginning of the meeting say, so, here's what I was thinking we could talk about today. Is there anything that you'd want to add onto that? And at the end of the meeting, I'm hoping that we can, conclude with this. So you've put it out there, right? If you don't do that, either in written form or at
That's
the,
right.
you risk the customer taking and going off over here, and then the hour goes by very quickly and you've made no progress at all, right? And you walk out of there going like,
Mm-hmm.
damn. So
Hmm.
now you're in the meeting. Talk about the importance of asking questions.
So we all expert on what we do, and we love to talk. We love to talk. We're salespeople, right? We love to talk about.
Me.
We love to talk about products. We love to talk about services. We love to talk about what's good about us as individuals and as the companies that we represent. The biggest thing is in sales, which I've learned over the years, and it took many years to learn it because it's never perfect. You always, it's like training your muscles, right? So you got to keep training. Is the
Mm-hmm.
listening part and open-ended question. I never ever. I always like this is in the back of my mind. It's been in the back of my mind like for 30, 40 years. I will never ask a closed-ended question unless if I'm stuck somewhere. It
Yeah.
always has to be an open-ended question as to why, what, and how, and never ask a yes or no question because you're going to get the no generally.
Give me some examples of your favorite open-ended questions.
So, can you describe to me the current process of how you deliver translation and why?
Awesome. Yep. And yeah, no, I love that. One of the things I ask is, could you describe the perfect solution? What would the ideal solution look like for you? If we work together 6 months from now, a year from now, and we meet to evaluate the relationship, what would need to happen for you to say this was a home run? Just get them
Yeah,
talking. And
yeah,
because they're going to give you the key to the sale right there,
that's
right?
right.
By the
That's right.
question that you asked in terms of understanding what their current processes are, because then you can understand how to optimize. But go ahead.
But one of the things I was, it's always missed in the entire, not just necessarily in localization world, but entire sales process as general as a sales profession, is come across authentic. You genuinely care about why you're asking the question. You're not just asking the question because somebody told you, your boss or Mark or somebody told you, hey, you should be asking the question.
You
No,
don't want to read it. You don't want to read a scripted question.
this is where people fault. They fall all the time is because they are coming across to the audience as, yeah, somebody put it in an email for them. In the next meeting, you should be asking the question. If it doesn't come out naturally, please don't ask the question. It
Well,
has to be authentic.
I'm sure you get sold to, because in your position as
Of course.
GM and VP at Lionbridge, you have vendors that approach you, right? They're
Mhm.
selling technology solutions like that. And what I've found is I will take one or two of those calls a month, because maybe I can use the tool or platform, but also I like to learn about the tools and technology, and I like to watch how people sell. And what I've found is more often than not, they'll say, "Can we have a half hour of your time, and we can introduce the platform?" And that's what I want, is I want them to introduce the platform, but they'll spend 20 minutes asking some too many qualifications that are scripted, just to your point,
Scripted.
right? Doesn't feel
I know.
sincere at all. And I feel like, man, you're just wasting my time. You could have sent me those questions in advance, because these are strictly qualification ones, right? We're in the meeting. I think once you have the meeting, the qualifications should be done, right? Now it's getting to know each other in terms of like, what are you,
That's right.
here's how the solution works. But maybe are you seeing something similar?
Yeah,
Like,
like I get you. Like a lot of people, they call me and they're trying to sell some solutions and they're trying to ask me questions, and it come across, Mark, as you're asking the question not to get to know me. You're asking the question to serve an internal purpose, an internal process that you have.
yep,
And here's an example.
filling in the box. Go ahead.
Yeah, they're trying to box you into something. They're
Yeah.
trying to put you into a box. either the size of the customer you are by the number of employees you have or the dollar you spend, etc. And then they can put you into a different process because, as you know, most companies have various process to various size customers. If you're a
Sure.
small customer, you're in the small customer hub. If you're a medium-sized customer, you may be getting like an account manager that gives you a call once a year. And if you're a big customer, you may get like an account manager, a business development manager, and they'll talk to you more often. I do believe like this is where things like fall apart for me personally, because as an individual, I want first to be appreciated as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not talking to me as an individual that you're interested in doing business with me, I don't know if I want to continue that conversation. If I'm continuing the conversation just because I'm being polite, but I will not take another call.
Yeah, and especially if you got the call with me because I wanted to see a demo, and then instead of doing the demo, you spend all that time doing the qualification stuff. It can be annoying. But back to your point, if you come across sincere and you ask questions because you really want to understand about the customer, I think it's important. I think the other thing is, depending on the questions you ask, you can come across as somebody that it enhances the trust. But part of the reason it does that is because if you ask intelligent questions that help the customer understand what some of their own challenges would be. And sometimes you might ask something like, have you thought about this, or how do you handle that? And they're like, wow, that's a good question. Can you, and they might even ask you, what are some of your other customers doing? And now you've built some trust because you have demonstrated your expertise.
That's right. Absolutely. And I want to give one more tip here to people who's listening to this is that
all two of you.
the next evolution, more than two, the next evolution of how you ask the question is by baking the question into a conversation. People respond better to conversations.
Mm-hmm.
If you bake the information gathering into a conversation, then you don't come across as an interrogator.
Mm-hmm.
You come across as we're both two individuals are having a conversation, getting to know each other. First, you have to figure out, does that individual, the target individual, do they agree to meet with you to get to know you, get to know your company? The getting to know part, once you've passed that bridge and we're inside the conversation of getting to know another, let's have that as a conversation versus, somebody told me, sales 101, ask 1, 2, 3, 4 questions. This will destroy the conversation completely.
I totally agree. And especially going back to your earlier point, if it's close-ended questions, because then you feel like you're being interrogated by the police, it's like, so earlier before we hit the record button, I think you mentioned that, you use Miller-Heinman in appropriate opportunities, but like, for example, when you deal with the government, you do something completely different. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So when you are working in not necessarily just the government, but anywhere where there is a closed loop sales process, basically you are not allowed to do active selling. You still do relationship building, etc. You can still get to know the people, but you're not going to expect the government to come in, I'm just using the government as an example, but could be banks or whatever, to come in and award a contract to you without going through a formal procurement process where the wild world area gets invited to it. Everybody in the world gets invited to it. Specifically in certain scenarios with government, that's a given. Although you can go in, network, build the relationships, get to know you, kind of a conversation with them, but they're not coming directly to you and they're saying, "Hey, Mark, here's a contract, give us your product." That has to go through a formal process. Now, you do the work the way we're in every environment is the same. So if you work with multinational companies or Fortune 500 companies, they have their own procurement process as well. But in some cases, you're able to work at a division level or a directorate level and close certain deals without going through, the complicated process. There is still process to go to, but you'd be one-on-one process versus this is a wild company-wide area that we need to outsource in a formal procurement process kind of thing. So, and in the latter, for instance, just to give an example, with many rules in place right now for U.S. and Canada, mm-hmm. In some cases, if you take somebody for lunch, for instance, they're not allowed to pay. They're not allowed to let you pay for their lunch, for instance, right? So they try to keep that whole influencing thing. They don't mind. You want to go for lunch and get to know people, but they're trying to figure out. And I think they started with the Sarbanes-Oxley. I'm not sure if that's what started it, but I think I'm not an expert on that area, but I think that's where it started. That influencing too much in a public domain, they're trying to remove that. So.
No, that's a huge challenge because again, part of the sales is relationship building. And hey, Robin, hey, why don't we go grab lunch? And we spend a fair amount of time, building rapport, maybe talk a little bit about business but it's nice to kind of get out of the office and then you have that relationship. Doesn't mean you're going to get the sale, but at least it's a start, right?
Yep.
And when you take that away, it makes things more challenging. So I'm wondering, how do you deal with that?
So it's more of just a public networking, and this is where a salesperson is required a lot of times in our industry, because we're not a big industry. We don't have, in some companies, our medium-sized company, they don't have one individual is focused on government and another individual is focused on other things, but maybe one individual is focusing on multi-sector. In a multi-sector environment, we have to be able to work with each sector based on its requirement. In the government sector, in the public sector, in a regulated sector, you have to use networking as your tool. And any chance you got, like for networking, you have to take it. Be it a conference, be it an event where government is present, or whoever your target audience are, not necessarily just government, are present. You have to be in there, rubbing elbows with them, talking to them, getting to know them, etc. So your name is not stranger to them anymore, right? And then when the formal procurement process is launched and they see your name, you're not some sort of a strange guy they don't know anything about. Sure. You become familiar to them. And although, you got to win on your merits, and nobody is asking here, I don't think in a normal sales process, you're not asking people to buy something that is not validated or substandard, or you're trying to do some sort of government at the end of the day, or customer in general at the end of the day, they need to pick the best, and they have a process to pick that. Not necessarily the cheapest. Nobody's talking about the cheapest anymore. Although in some cases we still see, entities, whoever they are, private or public sector, buying the cheapest. But they're more focused now on the human aspect of it. I'm seeing a lot more discussions around, who is your team? Where are they located? Are we going to be able to access to them? Are we going to be able to talk to them? Are you just going to sell me and then give me an email number or an email address, and somebody will? The after sale is becoming more important now in the discussion. The after the sale.
Totally agree with you. Hey, you talked about the professional networking and the importance of that, and just becoming known to potential buyers. And I know that you do a podcast, the Localization Fireside Chat, and I'm wondering, is that part of the rationale for it? And and why do you do the podcast? Because I have reasons why I do mine, but why do you do your podcast? Which I love, by the way. So.
Yeah, I hope people like it. I don't know. I mean, I feel like we're making some progress. I don't know, but in 2024 we already have like several exciting ones lined up for recording. I just published one this morning with Jeff Allen from SAP. It's pretty interesting. I didn't know he sings, so now I found out that he sings. So it's pretty good. Lock and Roll. I never heard of that song before. I gotta hear
Lock and Roll. Look for people who don't know. That's the localization or lock industry. But that's funny. Right. Lock and Roll.
So from my perspective on why I do a podcast, it started with me as like, I've seen a podcast, I've various one of them, and I've seen them, the way they're structured. And I do feel like, I remember and it's always been for me, like how I started with the industry 20 years ago, right? And I started going to the industry 20 years ago, industry events like Loc World. I think it was the first time it was hosted, and I think that was the only time it was hosted here in Montreal, and I attended it. And I came from a tech background, like from a telecom background, in the technology side thing. And I thought, up till today, I still feel like this industry has a lot of potential, but there's got a lot of things missing in it. And that, that conversation, that is open conversation, nobody in this industry, I don't know what it is. They're scared of each other or something. I have no idea. Nobody in this industry can sit down and talk to their competitor. I think, like, who are they? Like, why are you so worried about that? you should be able, I go to other industry associations or industries in general, and, people are collaborating, they're writing white papers together, they're doing things together to advance the industry forward. It seems that everybody in our industry have built a little cocoon for themselves and shelter themselves in it. And that's it. I'm happy with the world the way it is. There is a danger in that, because if we don't open the conversation, if we don't get to know one another, if we don't expand the conversation, there may be worlds around you that you don't know about. They're either past you, and now you're in the dust of the industry. I'm not talking to you, but you personally, but just everybody in the industry.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. So this is why I started the conversation in the podcast. Now, is it helping me personally? Of course it is. Is it helping me professionally? Of course it does. Now, there is a commitment for that. Like, I didn't know how to do video editing. Now I do. And there is reaching out to people, booking them. There's a logistics, and I do that myself, like nobody else is doing it. And of course, people ask me the question, and a million times comes up, is Lionbridge involved in that? No, they're not. I interviewed the CEO, like I'm talking to you right now, like I interviewed everybody else when I interviewed John. It's like it's a self-starting. I started it as my individual initiative, my personal initiative, and I think it's helping in expanding the conversation. We just passed 100,000 views on YouTube. And collectively, we have like about 50 videos now on YouTube.
Congratulations, man. That's awesome.
Thanks. For localization, like I tell people, for localization, for other industries, this is peanuts. But for localization, it's a good thing because
like you were saying, that our industry events, the biggest events are like Local and Gala. And at Local, you might have 600-700 people, which is nothing if you go compared to like, if you go to, I've been to a Microsoft event in Las Vegas, and there were 40,000 people there, right? And all different types of Microsoft partners, and kind of supplemental technology providers there. And it's interesting because the collaboration, I think sometimes people try to keep their cards closely held in our industry. I would say, for example, the ALC is a little bit different because it's small, medium-sized, family-run translation agencies, and they talk about a lot of common challenges that companies of their size face, like succession planning, for example, or how do you scale to the next level. That's kind of, in my experience, unique though. I love what you're doing on your podcast because you're doing something similar to MemoQ Talks, maybe a little bit more in depth, and we have different styles. But you're talking to these people, and they open up, and it's learning opportunities. I took a bunch of notes when you were talking to Benny Orr, for example, and it's just like, wow, this is great stuff here. And I'd met Benny several times, but until I listened to him on your podcast, I'd never kind of had those conversations with him. Next time I see him, I'm going to pull him aside and say, hey, you were talking about this. Let's talk more about it.
Yeah.
So you're doing a great job. I do also want to talk about, for people who don't realize it, it's a lot of work. When you start with the podcast, there's all this foundational work that you have to get in terms of where you're going to host it, the artwork, the descriptions, and so on and so forth, getting it out on different platforms. One of the biggest challenges when you first start is getting guests, because they're like, how many episodes have you done? 1, 2?
That's right.
Is this even real? And so for that, because this is the second episode of the Grow Fast podcast, brought to you by MemoQ RFP. It's only the second episode. I greatly appreciate you coming on here because,
Anytime,
like I said, it's not easy. The other reason I appreciate coming on here is because every time I talk to you, I learn from you, and I love learning. I love talking. You can ask my wife. I just never shut up. I also like learning. And look, I took a page of notes here.
Oh, wow.
In this 53-minute conversation. So I think I should start referring to you as Professor Robin from now on.
Oh my goodness. No, look, I appreciate the talks as well. We've known each other for many years, but we recently started talking more regularly. We've known each other for almost 20 years now, since the CLS days. And I always love talking to you, and not necessarily, to do you a favor or anything like this. I truly, genuinely love talking to you. Like, I really enjoy having a conversation with you. And if you're close to me, I bet you'd be one of those guys I'll be hanging out with, having a beer if you drink beer or something. So.
Definitely. And the feeling and respect is totally mutual. And hey, Robin, I really appreciate your time and in coming on the Grow Fast podcast. Wish you a remainder of these amazing holidays and a great 2024 ahead.
Absolutely. Happy New Year to everybody. And thank you, Mark, for allowing me to be part of this conversation.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye now.